Story 1. I'm a lover of horror slash supernatural slash creepy things. I spent a lot of my teens and childhood ghost hunting with my friends in random graveyards, rundown neighborhoods, abandoned factories, etc. That being said, we never really encountered anything other than psychosomatic ghosts that our overactive imagination created. Despite loving horror, I didn't believe that any sort of corporeal ghost was real. When I was 15, I traveled to Europe with my family. We stayed in Ettal, Germany, in a small inn for a few nights. My parents had a double on the second floor, my sisters had a double bedroom next to theirs, and I was lucky enough to have a single room all to myself at the far end of the hall. When we went to check into our rooms, as soon as I entered the hallway our rooms were in, I remember almost feeling as though I walked into a wall of bad energy. I just felt so unnerved and uneasy in that hallway. But I passed it off as overactive imagination. I slept the first night without any issues other than waking up a few times. The next morning at breakfast, one of my sisters mentioned feeling uncomfortable in the hallway, almost as if the air was crushing. It unnerved me even more that I wasn't the only one who felt weirded out. Plus, she was an adult at the time, so it further cemented in my head that that wing of the hotel was odd. Later that night, I'm sleeping peacefully, when at about 2 a.m., I'm woken by something ripping the covers off of me and being jerked about 2 feet towards the end of the bed by my ankle. At first, I thought someone had broken into my room, because when I turned towards what had grabbed me, a huge, looming black shape was visible in the darkness, like a man was in my room. I frantically flipped the light on, only to have there be nothing. The window was locked from the inside. There was no one in the closet or the bathroom. And my room was also still locked from the inside. I stayed up the rest of the night scared shitless, playing Cooking Mama on my DS. The next morning, we're at breakfast, and my sister mentions that she was up half the night because she thought she saw a person silhouetted against the wall of the room, but when she turned on the light, there was no one there. It was just a bizarre and creepy experience. We checked out that day, so I didn't get to experience anything after that, but it still freaks me out to this day. Story 2. I was a complete skeptic before this incident. My wife and I rented a secluded small 2-bedroom cabin in the Mount Rainier, Washington area for a hiking adventure. Upon arriving, my wife walked into the house and said there was no way she was sleeping in one of the bedrooms because there was bad energy in the room. In her defense, it was a bit creepy, weird doll dress on the wall as decoration, a rickety rocking chair in the corner, and an oddly placed door that was locked but presumably led to the attic. Once we got settled, we discover a cabin journal with entries from the past guest. There were multiple terrifying entries. My husband woke to the smell of bacon and eggs cooking. No one was awake yet. The doll dress in the bedroom is the gateway to hell. We woke last night to the sound of something walking in the attic. The locked door was unlocked and open when we woke in the morning. I called BS on all this, telling her I didn't believe any of it. We decided to sleep in the living room on the floor nonetheless and closed the door to the creepy room for the duration. The next night after hiking all day, we were eating and drinking outside at night by the fire. A few adult beverages into the evening, I started daring her to go into the bedroom. She was freaked out and wouldn't, but I said there was nothing wrong with the house and I proceeded to go inside to take the challenge of exploring the room more at night. As I entered the hallway, my hand hit the doorknob and I turned the handle to push the door inward to enter the room. The door opened about 10 inches and stopped as it hit a chair that was propped up against the door. My mind quickly calculated the logistics of the situation. The door opens inward, a room with only one entrance, a chair on another side of the door, keeping me from entering. That was somehow placed there from the inside. I let out a little girly scream, slammed the door shut, and played it off to my wife that I was trying to scare her. We stayed the night and I didn't tell her the real story until the next day when we were in the car driving away. She was pissed. Story 3. All through college and a little while after, I worked as a nurse's aide in a nursing home. I spent most of that time in the Alzheimer's unit, hospice, and the general facility for those who were unable to care for themselves. In my first aid job, I worked at a particularly unsettling location in Sioux Center, Iowa. It was an old hospital that was converted into a care facility. Think of a school built in the 1950s. A lot of granite, brick, and sturdy ceramic. Just beautiful. I've read that it has since been torn down and replaced with a new facility. So one day, a lady resident is dying. She's getting near the end and is in and out of consciousness. Just past the foot of her bed is a sink and counter that, along with her regular bathroom items, held a small glass of water. When this resident would come to, she'd point to the end of the bed and mumble comments about how the little girl was going to knock over the glass of water, that we had to tell her to play around because she was going to make a mess. Eventually, this resident slipped into unconsciousness. The nurse, an older woman herself who had been enrolled for decades and had seen it all, and I are sitting there making small talk, waiting for the inevitable, when the glass of water slides off the counter. The nurse doesn't even seem to notice. I, on the other hand, a 19-year-old guy who was mildly freaked out, began to ask the nurse if she saw it too, but was cut off by her saying, "Let's just focus on our patient, shall we?" I pulled myself together and tried to think about my job, but I was kind of losing it. That cup was inches away from the edge of the counter, and nobody was in the room with us. The resident eventually died, and we did our thing. Fast forward a few hours later, the way the hallways were set up, it looked like a very big T. At the top of the T, where the two halls formed a perpendicular meet, was the nurse's station. That's where I had to camp out most of the evening. Everyone was in bed, and I had to kill time between rounds. The nurse was on another floor doing something, and I was all alone. If you looked to the ceiling at the point where the two halls met, you'd see a circular mirror. It was so that you could see down all of the halls at once from the desk. Eventually, my peripheral picked up movement, and I looked up at the mirror. Right there in the middle of the hall, about 15 yards behind me, was the little girl. She looked about 6 with a little sundress and long brown hair. She was doing this slow, random dance that little girls sometimes do, without seeming to have a care in the world. I lost my shit. Stood up, walked around the entrance to the nurse's station while holding my hand up to the right side of my head so that I couldn't see down that hall, and bolted for the stairs. I found the nurse and told her what I saw. She laughed and admitted that over the years, a lot of residents had seen the little girl and that I had nothing to worry about. It took me a couple of hours to calm down, and in the next couple of years, I continued to work there. I never saw her again. Story 4. If you hear stories about Greyfriars Kirkyard in Edinburgh, Scotland being haunted, I advise you to believe them. I was visiting the city with my boyfriend. We were taking one of the haunted walk tours. Our guide was excellent. She was dressed all in black, very gothic, and was a talented actress. Being 6 foot and 5'10", we towered over the 2 other couples and the 2 hen parties that were on the tour with us. Out of respect for them, we stood in the back of the group. When we arrived at the Covenanters prison, worth a Google search, I thought our tour guide was laying it on wonderfully thick. She seemed genuinely concerned for our safety. She discussed how people get pushed, pulled, scratched, X'd. She told us that there was no shame in wanting to leave. If we got scared, she would lead us out. We were having a great time, and then something yanked on the back of my hair. My boyfriend saw me jerk back, and we both spun around. But we were at the back of the group. It was impressively strong, and it scared the crap out of me. We continued into a crypt in the Covenanters prison. Again, we stood at the back of the pack, but this time I was a little less happy about it. While our guide talked, I felt another tug on my hair. This one was much weaker than the last, so I could have just caught my hair on my jacket or purse. I was pretty freaked out. Some of the girls from one of the hen parties were pretty impaired. One girl was standing in front of us. I remember thinking she was very brave to wear white pants and a light yellow t-shirt to the muddy cemetery on a rainy day. She started jerking her right knee forward at an odd angle. After a few times, she turns around and yells, "Stop fucking kicking me!" Shit. My boyfriend and I look at each other and the other couple standing beside and slightly in front of us. None of us were anywhere near her. Now this girl was pretty intoxicated, so while I was already freaked out, I was prepared to disregard her until the last kick. I was watching her leg, and clear as day, she bent her knee forward and gasped, and I saw a muddy footprint appear on the back of her pants. They were bright white, and we all confirmed after the fact that it was a footprint. We could distinguish toes. At this point, I grabbed onto my boyfriend for dear life and held on until the guide was done talking. As soon as she was done, the other couple joined us in running out of that crypt. We all chatted with our tour guide and a couple of her co-workers for a while. She told us that our experience is pretty standard there. She wasn't acting when she warned us. Story 5. Growing up as a Navy brat, I lived in several houses, but only one was haunted. Thing was, it was a brand new house. However, the land was old and had a bloody history. This was in Virginia, where you could throw a stone and hit something colonial war or civil war or slave trade related almost every time. This brand new ranch-style house was always cold. Even in the hot, humid summers, you could turn off the AC and it would still be cold to the point that my toes would cramp up. Lights were always flickering, despite the wiring being new. Doorknobs were always being jiggled. The door that led into the garage was always shaking. Mom, who never bought the concept of the house being haunted, would say, "Oh, that's the wind going through that garage." Never mind that the garage door was almost always closed. We never parked the car in there. It was more or less used as a storage space. The rest of the doors would close themselves a few seconds after being opened. Not slamming themselves, mind you, just slowly closing themselves. Thing is, they hadn't always done this. For years they stayed open. Then one day they all seemingly decided to start closing by themselves. I always had this uneasy feeling of being watched by something. One night, whatever or whoever it was touched me. I'm 11. Being 11 and doing things 11-year-olds do, I sneaked out to the living room in the middle of the night to watch some late-night television. Like every kid who does this, I had my face inches from the screen and the volume almost down to 0. An itch began to build right between my shoulders, almost like someone was poking me. I reached over and that's when I felt it. A hand, a man's hand. My fingers touched in between fingers and brushed knuckles. I gasped and turned around, nothing. I turned off the television, jumped up, and ran back to my room. Under the covers, I buried myself, hoping that whatever had touched me wasn't going to follow me and start poking me again. It didn't. But after that, I didn't sneak out to watch late-night television for months and months. When I finally did, I would watch the screen for a minute and then turn around to make sure no one was behind me. No way was I going to be poked by a ghost again. Story 6. I lived in this house with a basement, and every time I walked up the stairs, I would get this weird, creepy goosebumps feeling on the back of my neck. It didn't make me uneasy to go down the stairs or to be in the basement. My craft room was down there, and I spent a lot of time there. After a while, I would have items I was using disappear when I would look away from them. I would search and search, and one day I got frustrated, and to no one in particular I said, "Can I please have my scissors back?" I had just looked under the pile of new mail, and when I turned my head, there were my scissors on top of the pile of mail. I talked to my neighbor, and she told me that the original owner of the house was a jolly old man who loved to prank people, and that he had fallen coming up the stairs one day and died. I think the goosebumps were him trying to tell me to be careful, and every time after that, when something would disappear, I would politely ask for it back, and it would appear in a place that I could not have missed before. Thanks, old man. It was fun. Story 7. This past summer, my girlfriend took me to the summer camp she usually works at. It was empty, with no rangers or guests at this Northeast Georgia camp. So we traversed the trails, and she revealed the little secret paths and history that one wouldn't get to appreciate on a normal visit. History such as the visit of John Bartram and the Cherokee people who once lived here. When we were finally ready to leave, we talked a little more on the way back to the parking lot. Now, this camp has an amphitheater, little walls extended beyond the bottom rows to sandwich visitors between it and the lake the amphitheater faces, guiding them towards the seats or away from them. And behind that wall, I saw a tall black figure with lanky limbs and no face. No face but a head with 3 protrusions that extended upward and bent down as if weighing themselves down. It was walking, a slow, ponderous walk, its hands swinging past its knees, and as if noticing my gaze, bent down and curled into a ball behind the wall, disappearing. I didn't freak out, but started questioning my girlfriend insistently. "Did you see that? What was it? Is anyone here?" She managed to extract from me what I saw of that being, and then she told me to run. The campers who work there insist that the camp is haunted. None dare to walk alone between the buildings at night. After driving out of the camp, my girlfriend and I discussed everything I saw, some of the paranormal things that seemed to happen, and the things others have seen. A house a group saw on Google Maps in the forest, only to find no trace in the same clearing. A large white possum, human-sized to be exact, was captured on a hunting camera and seen by a counselor and some Boy Scouts she was hiking with. These walkers tend to be one of those happenings. The last part is what cinches this for me. My girlfriend didn't tell anyone about what I saw. I felt a little crazy myself, a mistake on my part, until my girlfriend and I talked one night. She told me this: a group of counselors, her included, hung out in the teaching center late at night. They planned to sleep there and get away from some of the assholes that they had to share rooms with. After talking late into the night, everyone fell asleep in their bags. One counselor woke up again, having trouble sleeping. He looked out into the forest surrounding the teaching center. He saw them. It wasn't just one walker. 3 walkers tread a path around the center. They walked a circle around the gathered. Then they walked away. That counselor didn't find sleep for a long while. He didn't even tell others of the events of that night until a week later. Then my girlfriend told of what I saw. The counselors there are adamant. That camp is haunted. Story 8. I've had 2 very unrelated experiences that I can't explain. I don't want to jump to the conclusion that it was haunting, as I'm pretty skeptical of those things. I've simply had 2 experiences that I can't explain. 1, I was about 13 or 14 in my parents' basement, just passing the time waiting for my mom to bring me to hockey practice. I was in the house alone, sprawled out on a couch listening to a Discman. Yes, I'm old. Our house had a storage room in the basement, and I was laying across from the door. Now, since I was a kid, I remember the door handle of this room would always jiggle. It used to scare the shit out of friends sleeping over, like someone was inside, halfway turning the knob type thing. I always attributed it to the fact that the furnace was in this room, and so there must be some sort of draft. Anyways, on this particular day, I thought I saw something out of the corner of my eye. I turned around and the door was wide open. It has been closed, and then it abruptly closed as soon as I turned my head. Like something or someone opened it to take a look, and then got spooked that I saw it. I immediately jumped up and left the house. I just can't explain how a door opened like that, and then the moment I looked at it, it kind of slammed shut. 2. Fast forward to this October. I met a mutual friend in East Glacier, Montana, of all places. I won't go on about the circumstances, but we were thinking of dating and living a long way away from each other, so met around halfway for a weekend. We got wasted at this local dive bar, and this nice guy offered us a place to stay for free. He set us up with a room and fed us liquor. We sleep. In the morning, she and I were talking and the room doorknob made a sound. We look over. It twisted fully, the room door opened, and nothing was there. I thought I was imagining things, but the girl I was with was scared stiff, and we left. I later got the guy's number and texted him about it. He said something along the lines of, "Oh, don't worry, that's just Margaret." Story 9. Many moons ago, I used to be in the U.S. Navy stationed in Gaeta, Italy, assigned to the 6th Fleet flagship. Being a single sailor, I lived off of the ship with a few other roommates in a large 2-bedroom apartment. I had a room to myself. 2 guys shared a room, both straight, and 1 guy, a total freeloader named Justin, slept on the couch. We had 1 other roommate, a poltergeist that we called Calvin. Calvin roamed all of the apartments in the building, and everyone had seen or experienced something odd. It wasn't uncommon to hear dishes rattling in the kitchen, a door slamming, footsteps, etc. But a few things happened that were out of the ordinary. One weekend morning, I was sleeping after getting off duty. I had a mid-watch the night before, when the dishes in the kitchen started to rattle. All of my other roommates were out. I ignored it and tried to go back to sleep because I didn't want to go back to the ship. If I was on the ship, then someone would come up with something that they wanted me to do, and it was just normal activity in that apartment. But just as I was falling back to sleep, someone walked across my bed. I say someone because I could feel the mattress sink down with every step. Half asleep, I told Calvin that I was tired and asked him if he'd give me a break. Dead silence for the rest of the day. There were Brits who worked in Gaeta at some of the local bars where the sailors hanged out, and one of them would come over to our place and clean it for us while we were gone. One day she was cleaning the windows and needed to get some clean water. When she came back to the window, in a spot that she had recently cleaned, the glass was steamed over like someone had been breathing on it. Written on the glass in that spot was the word Calvin. She left and wouldn't come back to the apartment unless someone else was there. I I remembered coming back from that deployment to find a water bucket and some rags near the window and thought it was odd. It was several days later when I talked to my friend and found out why they were there. She didn't waste any time getting out of the apartment. Justin, the couch potato, would frequently wake everyone up by screaming profanities because Calvin was messing with him. One night, after having the blankets pulled off of him and getting thrown onto the floor, Justin stood up and yelled something like, "You want a piece of me? You motherfucker, bring it." He had a peace symbol tattooed on his chest, and the next morning there was an X scratched across it. It was several months before Justin came back to the apartment, and he wouldn't stay by himself. That was the only violent thing that Calvin ever did. For the most part, it was just harmless pranks. Bill, one of my roommates, and I were sitting in the living room. I forget what we were talking about. He was sitting on a couch that was parallel to the hallway, but because he was looking at me, the main door to the apartment at the end of the hall was in his peripheral vision. I was sitting in a chair with my back to the same hallway. Occasionally, Bill would look down the hall, almost like he had a nervous tic. I asked him what was wrong, and he said he kept seeing something out of the corner of his eye, but every time he turned to look, it was gone. I told him that the next time he saw something to keep looking at me and just use his peripheral vision. A few minutes later, Bill turned pale and I could see him break out in a sweat, even though I was several feet from him. He said that there was a woman with long hair at the end of the hall, in a long flowing gown or some sort of old dress, and that there was a light behind her, so he couldn't make out her face. Fast forward to last year when I was talking to my wife, who's from Gaeta, about Calvin. She got an odd look on her face and called her mom to verify something that she remembered from her childhood. When she got off the phone, she told me about this medicine woman that her mother used to take her to see when she was a child. This woman could cure someone just by touching you where you were hurt. Oddly enough, she lived on the bottom floor of the apartment building that Calvin called home.